Hello and welcome back. Continuing with my look into the Seasons mod, going to move on now to objects, map objects. Again, I'm on the Realism US modding site here in the manual. For all of the bits and pieces, the instructions of how to do things, there's quite a lot of information here to do with map objects, but you can have a read through all of this stuff and work out what you want to look at, what you want to play around with. I want to have a look at one specific area within the Seasons mod, and this is frozen lakes, and how we go about actually creating our icePlane in Blender, and then applying that to the map itself. Now I must point out I am not very good with Blender. I am learning as I go along, sort of thing, which is pretty much everything. With everything I do, I just play around with it until I make it work, and then do a video on it. So I'll have a very quick read through this because there's not very much information here. It just says frozen lakes. It is not possible to freeze a lake. It is, however, possible to make it look like it's frozen by adding a plane just above the water with a frozen ice texture, then use the ssIcePlane admirer to make it visible only when the ground is frozen. Must make sure that the plane is set to invisible so it does not show up when you're not using seasons. You have a class name of ssIcePlane and there's no attributes. Okay, so basically what we need to do, this is very straightforward as far as it goes. It's not going to give you masses of information here. Hopefully that's what I'm going to be able to provide in the video. And as I say, we're going to have a bit of a play around with Blender and see if we can actually create our plane and everything else. And then create our user attributes, which is basically what this part here is talking about, to do with the ssIcePlane admiral. You need to create a new user attribute so it points to the correct script and everything, so it only appears at certain times of the year when the ground is frozen, and so on and so on, and whatever else. So okay, I'm not going to leave that open because I continually get pop-ups throughout the videos and it really annoys me and I have to stop and start again and all the rest of it, so I'm going to close that down. It's not much information there to read anyway. So I've already gone ahead and downloaded a image on my desktop here. We'll just have a very quick look at that. I was just waiting to Google search and did a search for frozen lake images or frozen lake textures or something like that, and I come up with this one. I went through various different ones and I really like this one, but for me that's a little bit plain and straightforward as it is. Very nice texture, but I want to do something with it before I continue with this. Now what I would say is, in my testing with this, because the way that the textures tend to work, flat textures on a flat plane, unless you have some really high resolution textures to work with, you can end up with them looking very stretched and distorted and yeah, not very good at all really. And the higher the resolution textures that you apply, obviously then you will end up with frame hits and stuff like that. So we have to work with what we've got really, and what we can actually use within the game and all the rest of it. So for me this tends to work, so that's what I'm going to go with. So what I want to do is actually create a larger image. This is going to be 2048 by 1024. I would recommend that you play around with the images, the size and everything else, and get what works for you depending on the size of the area that you're going to put the icePlane on. If it's a very small pond, which is what I'm going to be working with today, two in actual facts on this particular map. I'm going to use exactly the same map that I did in my last video with the snow mask or seasons mask. It's only got two smallish areas that I'm going to be covering. If you're working with a much larger area, then obviously you would need to create something that would cover that and then work with your textures and whatever. Like I say, I'm not very good with Blender. I'm going to muddle through in the video here just to give you an idea of what you can and cannot do and all the rest of it and whatever else. So what I want to do is I want to make a mirror of the image that I've got here. So take another look at this particular image. I want to make a mirror of that image. Now I've only got paint.net and some other free-ish programs, so I haven't got anything like Photoshop and all the other fancy expensive programs to work with. So I found this particular website called Lunapic. I'll put a link in the description. You can upload your pictures, your photos, whatever else, and it's got loads of different filters and animation adjustments and all sorts of bits and pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click browse. I'm on my desktop here, so I'm going to find my image and I'm going to go open. Now to my understanding this will only accept things like PNGs, JPEGs, things like that. It won't work with DDS files, so you need to do this before you convert it into a DDS to then work with whatever else. So like I said, I just downloaded this image straight from Google, so a Google search, so I think this is just a straightforward JPEG image. Yeah, it is, yeah. So leave it as a JPEG or a PNG or something like that to start with. Do your conversion or whatever you're going to do with the image, and then we'll convert that later. So I've got my image here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into adjust, I think it is, yeah, adjust, and I'm going to do mirror. So I've mirrored the object or the actual texture, and I'm just going to come down here and click save. Not going to worry about the names of it and anything else because I'm going to change them anyway, and I'm going to go save. Okay, so I've now put that on my desktop. Don't need to be in this site anymore. So now that I've got my two images, my original and the mirrored, I want to convert these into DDS files, and then I want to resize them so that they're going to do what I want to do with them. So I'm going to literally right click on this one. I'm going to go open with paint.net, and then you can see this particular size is 700 by 467, which is of no use to me because that's going to cause problems if I keep it at that size. So I'm going to go into image resize, and I'm going to go 1024 by 512 and click OK, and then I'm going to go file, save as, and we will call this frozen underscore lake. I'm going to go down, choose DDS, save, DXT3 with bitmap. So now I'm going to open up the mirrored image in paint.net. So we'll come down here, paint.net. Same again, image resize 1024 by 512. We'll OK that. File, save as, and then we'll choose DDS. So it highlights my other one. I'm going to click on that so I don't have to type the whole name in. I'm going to just come in here and go 1. We'll save DXT3 with bitmap. OK. Excellent. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go new, and I'm going to go 2048 by 1024. So I have a new canvas. We can actually close down this one because I don't need that. So I've got a new canvas of a 2048 by 1024, and I'm going to go layers, import from file. I'm going to choose my frozen lake DDS, and we'll open that, and we'll just leave that there, that's fine, and deselect it, layers, import from file, and we'll choose our mirror, and we can bring that down. And then we need to rotate it. It's going to be a bit fiddly to get it all to line up and everything. Using the information down here, you can get the angle as close as you possibly can to what you want it to be, so it's not, it looks correct for what you want to get out of it. Don't have to do exactly what I'm doing here, but this is just giving you an idea of what can be done. So we don't want it to have any seam marks, join marks, whatever you want to call them, in between. So we're going to crop this a little bit later on to get rid of all of that. Okay, so that one's in, so I can go ahead and deselect. Looks pretty good so far. So I'm going to go layers, import from file, we'll choose our first one again. Going to bring this over here and we'll rotate it. We'll come down. Again, getting it as close as I possibly can without having any seam marks or join marks or whatever else. Doesn't matter if you overlap just a little bit. Whoops, I need a new mouse desperately. Something I'm going to have to get. Okay, so I think that doesn't look too bad there. Okay, so that'll be fine. We'll deselect, layers, import from file, we'll choose our mirror, and then we'll drag this one over up the top here and join it in like so. Make sure we've got no join marks again. So a little bit of overlapping, doesn't matter too much. As long as it looks pretty good. Might need to rotate it down that way just a tad. If it will let me. Come on. I don't think that looks too bad there, and we'll deselect. Okay, so I'm going to go with that. That'll be fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to click somewhere up in the top here and drag outwards, just so that I can actually make the image a little bit clearer, so I'm not getting any of the white lines around the outside. And then we'll go image crop to selection. So now you can see I've got none of the white lines that I had there around the outside. There's no join marks or anything else. By the looks of things, it looks pretty good. Obviously you can zoom in and just check the image and make sure it looks pretty good all round, whatever else. But because I've now obviously cropped it, the actual size of the image has been changed. So if I was to use this, it would cause an error in Giants Editor once we get down that road. Blender won't care, but Giants Editor will it, because it's not a multiplication of 2. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into image and flatten, which will join all of my layers together. And then I'm going to go image resize, and I'm going to just change this back to 2048 by 1024, and we'll go OK. Fantastic. And then I'm going to go file, save as, and we'll change this to a DDS, and we'll choose this one, and then I'm just going to change this to a 2, and we'll go save. DXT3 with bitmap. Fantastic. And we'll do that. So now we've got our image to work with. Again, this is the size of the image that I'm going to go with. You will need to experiment with whatever image you're going to work with and see what works for you, but this tends to work quite well, I think. So again, that's what I'm going to go with. Okay, so now that we've got to this part, I'm going to go ahead and shut that down. We'll move all this stuff out of the way just in case we do need to go back to it. And we're just going to concentrate with our frozen lake 2.dds. Okay, so we're going to be working with Blender. There's a couple of things I want to show you here. First of all, you need to go to your Farming Simulator installation folder. So I'm running Steam, so I'm going to go into Steam, Steam Apps, Common, Farming Simulator 17, and we have a folder called SDK. If we open this up, there's a Blender i3D Exporter version 7. This works perfectly fine. I don't know if there's a later version, I haven't checked. There's one for Maya and 3D Max and all the rest of it here as well, so whichever program you happen to be using. Again, I'm working with Blender, so you need to run this program, which will then actually install that into Blender. So if we actually open up Blender, and I'm working with version 2.79, we go into Files, User Preferences. If we click on Game Engine, in here there's some tick boxes, and the top one says Game Engine, Giants i3D Exporter Tools. You need to put a tick in that and save your user preferences or user settings. If we go back to All, and then type in the search box Image, we will then get this image, Import Export, Import Image as Plane, or Planes, and then put a tick in that one and save your user settings there as well. Okay, so now that we've done those, I'm going to go ahead and press X on my keyboard to delete the cube, because I don't want that. And by changing that user preference there, I can go Shift A, and normally we would click on a plane and then apply our material over here and our texture, UV unwrap it, etc, etc. But by doing it this way, we can cut a few corners and actually import the image, which will then automatically create a plane. So I'm going to go to my desktop here. We've got a frozen _ lake 2.dds, and I'm going to import that. It's automatically created a plane for us. And if I then go into this one down here and go texture, you can see the texture is automatically applied to it. We have our material created for us, we have our texture created for us. So we don't have to do anything really that's too sort of taxing or whatever else. It's in my opinion, a much easier and simpler way of creating our plane with a texture automatically applied to it and everything else. It's very little we need to do. So what I'm going to do now is press N on my keyboard, which will bring up my transforms and whatever else. All this stuff in here is the little pull out box thingy here. So obviously that's rotated the wrong way for me, so what I want to do is go into my rotation up here and change all of these to 0, press enter. So now it's just a nice flat plane. Perfect, done. Don't need to mess about with that too much now. You can now, if you want to, have a bit more of a play around with this. So you can go into your UV editing. If we select it over here, I can come over to this one and select all of this stuff, and then I can scale this up and down with the S key and whatever else. So if I actually apply my texture to my image on this side, and I come back over here and then scale this, you can see the image changes, so you can bring it right out, have the pattern reoccurring multiple times, whatever you want. So you can have a play around with that. It's automatically done by importing the image as a plane. So you can have a play around with this and change all the bits and pieces to your heart's content. So I'm just going to leave it somewhere like that. That's perfectly fine. It looks pretty good. And then I'm going to go back to my default page here. Okay, so now that I've actually got the image set up however I want it to be, I've had a play around with the UV and all the rest of it and applied it and whatever else. So I want to now scale this up, because this is set at a scale of 1 at the moment, and that's looks relatively biggish in Blender, but if I now export this and bring it into Giants Editor, that will be tiny. I mean really tiny. It'll be just a small little cube or rectangle, whatever you want to call it. It'll just be a really small plane, and you'll have to then scale it up within Giants Editor, and the more you scale it in Giants Editor, it will stretch and distort the image, the texture applied to the plane more and more and more. So we don't want to do that. We want to actually scale it up in Blender before we export it. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to press my S key on the keyboard, and I'm just going to drag out. And make sure you drag out, because if you drag inwards and across it, your texture will disappear, because you're mirroring the texture in effect. So you need to make sure you drag the right way. So we're going to drag right out to somewhere like there, like that. That looks pretty good. That's still going to be quite small in Giants Editor, so you may want to come out really big, but the bigger you come out, then obviously you may have issues with the texture distorting and all sorts, even in Blender. So I would just sort of stick to your grid size, maybe just a little bit outside of that. And you may have to apply more cameras and lighting effects and whatever else, the lamps and whatever, to be able to see the texture. So the bigger you get, you may have to apply, or create new cameras and lighting and all the rest of it to be able to see it. But I'm going to just go with what I've got at the moment. So now that I've got that, we can see that the scaling has gone up to over 8, it's nearly 9. But if I now export it as it is, when I bring it into Giants Editor, it's going to show that scaling in Giants Editor. So if I put the scaling back to 1 in Giants Editor, it's going to revert back to its original size, which is going to be really, really small. So I want to export it with that size, but I need to change the scaling. So to do that, I come down to Object, I'm going to go Apply and click on Scale. And you can see now the scale has gone back to 1, but the actual size of the plane is still what I've set it to. So we should be pretty good there. Okay, so I'm going to select it all, and I'm going to go File, Export, Giants i3D. I'm going to go to my desktop, and we'll just call this frozen underscore lake. That'll be fine. We'll press enter, and it puts my i3D on the end for me, and we'll go export. So I'm going to minimize that, because I tend to just minimize it just in case something goes wrong and I don't have to start the whole process all over again. So we've now got our i3D and our texture on our desktop here. Before we open this in Giants Editor though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go edit with Notepad++, because the path file name that Blender has given the actual files here is c:users, etc, etc, etc. We don't want any of that, because it will confuse it once we then get it into the map and zip the map up and everything else. So what we want to do is delete all of that. So we've just got our frozen underscore lake 2.dds, which is on our desktop. So go ahead and save. We'll close all that down. Now we can open up Giants Editor. So now that we're actually into Giants Editor, we can have a take a look at our image and whatever else. You can see the edges are a little bit distorted here, which is what I said earlier on about how you scale it in Blender. It might be just a little bit of experimentation But that's fine, I'm going to go with it because I can just bury that somewhere under the actual sides of the pond that I'm going to be applying it to. As long as the main texture in the middle is okay, I'm not too fussed with that, at least for the video anyway. I would probably have a bit more of a play around in Blender to get this looking a bit better, but for the video I'm just doing this roughly, very quickly, so you can see what's involved really, because you're not supplied one by the Seasons guys. The Realism US modding, they don't give you this, you have to create this yourself, so trying to give you all the information you can possibly get with what knowledge I know, limited may it be. But okay, so if we have a look now in our console down the bottom here, we've actually got a warning. It says, warning, i3D contains non-binary index triangle sets. So we don't want that because that's going to cause us problems. So the way we overcome that is if we go File and then go Save As, make sure we're on our desktop. We've got our Frozen Lake i3D, which is what we're actually in at the moment. If I click on that and then just go Save, it's going to say, do you want to replace it? We don't want to replace it. What we want to do is actually change it to a binary i3D file. So at the moment we're going to save it as just a standard i3D, which we don't want. We want to save it as a binary i3D. So we need to do that. And then if we go Save, we want to replace that. And if I then close this down, we don't want to do that. We click No. Now what we've got on our desktop is our i3D and i3D shapes, which is what we require. And obviously our texture file. Okay, so now what we can do is open up our map folder we're going to be working with. And I'm just going to go into here, Maps, and I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this Seasons. And I'm going to take all of that, drag it over and move it into that folder. Fantastic. So now what I can do is open up the map in Giants Editor. So now we've got the actual map opened up in Giants Editor here. This is one of the areas that I'm going to be applying the icePlane to. There's also one over there by the wood yard. So this particular pond, whatever you want to call it, even though it has a water plane on it, it actually has a water fill trigger on top of it. So this isn't necessarily a problem, but the issue may arise that if you now put your icePlane on top of that, it's going to potentially interfere with that trigger. If you're using Seasons, it won't matter because Seasons will automatically deactivate the collision that's applied to the Seasons, the icePlane. But if you're going to use this map without the Seasons mod running, the collision will not be deactivated, so you then will not be able to actually hit the trigger. So there will be some problems there. Okay, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go File, Import. I'm going to go into my map folder here, Maps, Seasons. I'm going to bring in my Frozen Lake. Now because I exported everything from the Blender session, it brought out the camera and the lamp with it. I don't need both of those, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight those and delete them. I'm going to click on my Frozen Lake 2 icePlane here, and I'm going to go Control B and click over here. You could also go Edit and Interactive Placement, whichever works. So we've now got our texture into the map. It looks pretty good actually. It looks better than it did when I opened it previously in Giants Editor. So potentially that's because I saved it with the binary setup and it's now put all the triangles in the right place. The triangle sets have been applied correctly. Okay, so I need to obviously have a play around with this and scale it, and this comes back to what I was saying before with Blender. You may need to take your plane within Blender and make this much bigger before you export it, whatever works for you guys. So I'm going to just go with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lower it down a little bit. I just want it to be just above the water plane. I don't want it to be too much above it, just above it as much as you possibly can, without it interfering with anything else if possible. And then I need to scale it, so I'm going to come over to here and I'm going to go 3, let's do 5, something like that. That'll be fine again for the video. You don't want to overscale it, you want it to be somewhere around about all you need and no more, because that's a little bit too big really. So let's go 4.5 and see what that is like. That'll be fine, that'll be okay. And then I'm going to come down to my scale Z, and I'm going to go 3, 4, and I'll bring this over a little bit. There we go. And we can have a play around with this and get this at the height we want it to be at. So, like I say, it just needs to be just above the water plane, somewhere like that is perfect. So it's not interfering with the lilies or the grass, whatever these things are. The I forget what these things are, just grass I think, anyway, whatever. It's not interfering with anything else there, it's just creating our ice plane above the water, so fantastic. But like I said before, if you're running the map without seasons mod in the mod folder, you're going to see this all year round. It will just be there all the time. So going back to what I read earlier on the actual Realism US modding site, it says to make it invisible so that if you're not running the seasons mod, you can't see it. Well, we do that by, again, highlighting it in the cinegraph here, coming over to my attributes, and we've got this tick box called visibility. If I remove the tick, it disappears. We know it's still there. If I put the tick back, it's there. But we want to take the tick away so that it's not visible in-game if you're not running the seasons mod. Okay, so now the next thing then is to actually allow seasons mod to know that we've put this in the map, because at the moment it's just a rigid object that the mod has absolutely no idea exists. So this comes back to, again, what I read earlier on that website, on the Realism US modding site, where it says we need to add the ssIcePlane Admirer, which is talking about our attributes, our user attributes. So again, with it highlighted in the cinegraph here, what we need to do here is go into on create in our name, adding a new attribute, and we need to change this to a script callback. So we're going to go add, and then in here we go ss capital I capital P. So we've got ssIcePlane dot on create, and all of this must be spelt with the uppercase letters in the correct places. If you put it in any other way, it will not work. The actual script won't recognize it and it'll ignore it. So you need to be careful when you do this how you actually spell it. So okay, so now that we've put that into there, we can go ahead and hit our tab key on our keyboard, and that's now locked in. Fantastic. Now that we've done one, I can highlight this one, Control D to make a copy of it, and because we already automatically put all of our pieces into here, we deactivated the visibility on the first one, it's going to take that copy and we don't need to do it all over again. So with it highlighted, I'm going to come over to the next area, which is over here by my logging area here, and I'm going to go Control B and then place it over here, but I can't see it, so for now I need to turn the visibility back on so I can actually place it in the manner I want it to be. So I'm going to rotate it so I can see it a little bit better. Might need to bring it up to resize it because that's far too big, so we're going to downsize it a little bit and we'll go down. That's probably not too bad actually there, something like that. And then what we'll do is we'll change this one to 4.2, 4.4, 4.5. You need to again have a bit of a play around with your scaling just to get it so it fits all of the area that you're going to be applying it to. Okay, that's not too bad, that looks pretty good, and it's in the right area just above our water plane, so fantastic. Because what we want to do here is we want to have it as a rigid body with a collision so that when it freezes over we can actually walk on top of it, but with the seasons mod running, it will automatically deactivate that collision. So when the snow mask or seasons mask, when the ice plane is not visible, made visible by the seasons mod, you'll be still able to walk into the river and you know, actually walk underneath the water. But as soon as it activates the ice plane, you then won't be able to do that. You'll only be able to walk on top of it. So that's what we want. Like I said, the limitation of that is if you're not running the seasons mod, the collision will be activated all the time. By deactivating the visibility, you won't be able to see it, but you won't then be able to walk into the water. So this comes back to triggers and things like that, because this has potentially got a trigger on it to sell our logs in here. I don't know if it has or not, but if it has, then if you're not running Seasons mod, you may not be able to sell your logs in this particular area because they won't actually disappear into the water, because they're going to hit the collision and just roll around on top of the invisible icePlane. But if you're running Seasons, it will deactivate the collision and then it will work. So that's the whole idea. So I would recommend that if you're not going to be running Seasons on the map, then don't put this icePlane in there. Or at least if you're going to be creating a map to share with others, put that in some sort of a note, you know, in your PDF with that comes with the map or whatever, to let users know that there is an icePlane applied to the water bodies on the map, and that it may interfere with triggers and things like that. So just to make everybody aware of what's going on, because otherwise, you know, it could get a little bit frustrating if you were to download a map. You don't want to run it with Seasons, but you want to play on the map, and then you can't actually find the water triggers, and you can't sell your logs because it's hitting an invisible collision and things like that. So anyway, okay, so we've now got both of those in the right place. We've applied our icePlanes, and we've turned off the visibility, and we've actually applied our new user attribute so it looks at the right script and deactivates it and activates it when it needs to. So we can go ahead and save. So now that we've actually saved the map, I'm going to go ahead and close that down. Don't need that open anymore. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to put this into my mods folder. So I'll just show you what actual mods I'm running on this particular setup. If I can find the folder, there it is. I always run my map folders unzipped so that I can edit them easily. Don't have to keep unzipping it and rezipping it and so on and so on. Wouldn't work for multiplayer if it was unzipped, but for single player it's fine. So all I've got in here is the game extension, the Seasons mod, console extension, and the fast forward mod. That's the only mods I'm running. So the next thing then, what I'm going to do is I'll actually close down Blender because I don't need this anymore. And then I'm going to get into game, and I'll show you first of all without Seasons mod activated. Even though it's in my mod folder, I'm not going to activate it, and we'll then have a look at the actual water plane, because this will then test that visibility remark or note that I said about earlier on, to show you that it doesn't show up on the water plane even if you choose not to run Seasons mod. So that's what we're going to do next. So you can see that I'm not cheating or anything else like that. I'm just coming to the actual mods DLC page here. You can see we've got the Seasons mod in the mod folder, but I'm going to deactivate it, take the tick away, and we'll then start the map up. So then once we get into the map, we know we don't have Seasons activated, and what I'll do is I'll go over by, I think it's by field 5. So I'll just teleport over to field 5 here, which is where the actual water plane is, and you can see we have no icePlane, but I can't walk under the water because of that collision. This is what I was saying earlier on. Because the icePlane is still there, we might not be able to see it, but the game knows it's there. It knows there's something on top of this water, and it's actually set up as a collision, so I can no longer walk into the water. Now this, again, because this particular water plane has a water fill trigger applied to it, this may cause you issues on this particular setup, because you won't be able to reverse your trailer into your water bowser to collect your water from this particular river anymore if you're not running Seasons mod. If you are running Seasons mod, then as I said before, the collision will be deactivated by the script, and you'll be able to access the water, hit the fill trigger, hit the water fill trigger, and get your water, unless the water then becomes frozen. Your icePlane will then show up, the collision will be activated, and you'll no longer be able to get into the trigger. So a role-playing scenario there would be quite good, because you can only get water while it's not frozen. So again, that comes into the potentials of the Seasons mod and what you can do with it. Okay, so what I'll do then is I'll pause here. I'm going to stop Bandicam, because if I exit out now it'll screw it all up. So I'll stop recording, and then we'll come back to the mods DLC page, and I'll show you that the actual Seasons mod is then activated, we'll get back in again and we'll have a look, see what happens next. Okay, so we've now come back again to the Mods DLC page here, and you can see I've still got the Seasons mod there, and it is now activated. So we'll press start, we'll get into game. It'll take a little bit longer to load in this to do with the Seasons mod and whatever else, which is fine, no problem. And we'll get into map. Okay, so you can see we've got the pop-up that tells us we're in spring and whatever else, and in the background, I don't know if you noticed that because it's a bit dark, but it reset all of our grass to first growth state and whatever else it does. So we've got our information in the top right hand corner there, and we can go Alt F, which brings up the weather. We can go, oops, turn on my light, we can go Alt S and bring up our crop page here, when we can harvest and when we can seed and all the rest of it. If we then go across to the next page, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down to 3 days so I don't have to fast forward too much. And I'll apply that. Okay, and we'll come back out. So again, what I'll do is I'll transport myself or teleport myself over to where field 5 is. We'll just speed up time a little bit. And again, you can see I don't have a icePlane here, but now if I go into it, I can actually walk under the water because the script has deactivated the collision, as I said before. So now if I wanted to access this for my water fill trigger, I'd have absolutely no problems whatsoever. It would only be later on in the year, as we get to winter and the icePlane then appears, I will no longer be able to access that water fill trigger. So what I'll do is I'm going to fast forward time here, because we're still obviously in early spring. I don't like doing this because it does mess up seasons somewhat, fast forwarding above 120 I think times, but you know, I'll be here forever if I don't do this. So I'll continue to fast forward and then through the night and whatever else, and when we get up to the appropriate time that I think we might then get an icePlane appear, we'll come back and we'll have a look at it and we'll see where we go from there. Right, so we've now come round to late autumn, as you can see in the top right hand corner there. So all I'm going to do here then is, and you might not be able to see this actually happen because as the temperature drops through the night, the icePlane might just suddenly appear and it'll be pitch black, so I can't really do much about that, unfortunately. What I'll do is I'll try and get as close as I can to night time, and then because the temperature's dropping now, 7 degrees, 6 degrees, 5, 4, and then what I'll do is I'll just go up 120, something like that, and we'll see what happens. Turn on my flashlight if I can, there we go, might be able to see it. I don't know what the temperature will drop down to when it goes over to winter. It may not drop down enough for it to appear immediately, and there we go. So we're now into winter and we have our icePlane appear, and obviously now I can walk on top of it, whereas before I could walk underneath it without any issues whatsoever. I'm not going to use the fast forward mod at this point, unfortunately. It just causes my game to crash. I've done this about 20 times now, got to this point, and then used the fast forward mod once the icePlane has come up, and for some reason it causes the game to crash. I did have some issues with one of my hard drives, so it may not be anything to do with this. It may be my hard drive that's on its way out, unfortunately, needs to be replaced, but I don't want to take any more chances and have to do this all over again. So anyway, we now have our icePlane appear. I don't think it looks too bad. Obviously if we were in the daylight then it might look a little bit better, but again, what we're working with here is a plane with a 2D texture applied to it. It's just a standard texture, so you know it's not going to look fantastic. I did try to have a bit of an experiment with adding some different deformation modifiers within Blender to give it a bit more of a realistic look, but that created far too many vertices, and then the game basically said no, we're not doing that. So I had to revert back to just a standard flat plane with a texture on it. There are more than, you know, there's absolutely loads of textures on Google search. If you do a Google search, there's loads and loads and loads. I just chose this one because I quite liked it. but and I just had a bit of a play around with it, as you could see earlier on in the video. But you may need to experiment with some of the textures, have a bit of a play around with them. I'm just going to test this out because it's taking too long. Just see if we can get round to some daylight. Hopefully it doesn't crash my game again. There we go, that'll do. I can see it a bit better now. Turn off my flashlight. Okay, so theoretically now, if I was, you know, out on the road in my tractor or whatever else, and I was driving past, you would be able to see across there quite nicely we have a frozen pond or lake or whatever you want to call it. But the idea, I think, behind this would be to, again, like I said before, give you a role play scenario where you have access to your water fill triggers and whatever else at certain times of the year, and then as the temperature drops below freezing, the icePlane then comes over your water fill trigger and prevents you from accessing it. You know, that's the way I would look at it. So it's just a nice added feature with the Seasons mod, giving you a little bit more variation in your gameplay and stuff like that. So I'm just going to speed up time again. We'll get above freezing and we'll just see, I don't know how the actual script is set up, what temperature the water unfreezes sort of thing. So it may not for some time, I don't know. If we continue on through a little bit here, because now we're getting into night again, it's going to obviously freeze again. So we'll skip the night with Alt-N and we'll just see what happens. It may not disappear until it gets a bit warmer, or it gets to the next season, if you like. I'm surprised we actually haven't had any snow as yet. That might come later. I'd like to see the snow and the icePlane together if possible, but I don't know if it will actually do that for me. Don't think it's going to do that. No. Oh well. And we're into spring, and the icePlane then disappears. So we didn't actually get any snow that time round. It may, again, that's all controlled by the script. I have no actual control over any of that sort of stuff. Like I showed in the previous video, we could go into here and type in our ss add snow. We'll see how quickly it comes in, because it took forever in the last video when I did this, so just out of curiosity, see if it comes in any quicker or not. But you know, the idea is we have a icePlane in the map and it works. There we go, we have our snow. So now if we had our icePlane as well, you'd be able to see the two working together and all the rest of it. I should have done this before when I had the icePlane there, and it goes away again because I've got it on 120 times and we're in the wrong time of the year for it. But it all works, it's all set up, so hopefully what I've shown you there in the video will give you an idea at least of how to create a plane from an image within Blender with your texture and everything else already applied, scaling it up and all the rest of it, playing around with the UV, and then exporting that out as an i3D, changing your path file name in your i3D so that it knows exactly what it's looking for and everything else, texture wise, opening it up in Giants Editor and then saving it as a binary i3D. Once you've saved it as a binary i3D and it then creates your i3D shapes, you're solid, you're good. You can move on and save it from there and you'll have no issues, and make any changes, scaling it and whatever else within Giants Editor, and then bring it into the map, importing it into the map, setting it up with our user attribute, deactivating the visibility so it doesn't show up if you're not using the Seasons mod, and all the rest of the bits and pieces. So hopefully what I've shown you there is more than enough to at least get you started with playing around with different objects. I mean, obviously this is specific to the ssIcePlane setup. I'm going to look into some of the other objects as I get to them, hedges and things like that, and how how they change colour throughout the year and whatever else, and how to set all that sort of stuff up, and then I'll do another video on that as well. So what I'll say now then is thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this has been of some help to anybody who was curious about how to set this up but it didn't quite understand the instructions and whatever else.